Today we're talking about the most anticipated and discussed change of the next upcoming patch. New item icons. No, we're obviously talking about the Soul Eater buff. And in that context, I'd first like to thank Oxys for all the work he's done in the Math Quangs group already. So there's a lot of information that wasn't originally gathered by me, I just kind of verified it, and he's already done that. Shoutouts to him. We're gonna talk not only about what has changed about the item, but also how it fits in the meta, what other items can offer in comparison, and how it works on certain characters. So we're gonna have a big overview for the item, giving you all the information you need. We'll start with the change itself. Soul Eater is now 2,400 gold. It gives plus 30 physical power, plus 10% physical lifesteal, and 10% cooldown reduction. Oddly enough, on the PTS it also still has 200 extra mana. I don't think that's gonna make it into the final version of the item though. I think that's just an oversight and was intended to be removed. The passive: each time anything dies near you, you gain a stack. Gods, large jungle monsters, and jungle bosses provide 5 stacks. At 100 stacks, Soul Eater evolves, gaining plus 20 physical power and allowing your abilities to heal you for 10% of the damage dealt. So essentially, what this is 10% ability lifesteal. As such, the stacked version of the item has 50 physical power, 10% physical basic attack lifesteal, 10% physical ability lifesteal, and 10% cooldown reduction. Now, you may remember a time earlier this season, specifically on the PTS for the entire season, there was a glitch that actually granted physical gods physical damage lifesteal through abilities. This was removed. This was obviously not intended at that point, but maybe it was the inspiration for this version of Soul Eater, just thinking maybe you can throw this interaction into the game somehow. Now, Magical God always had magical ability lifesteal. Why is that not the case for physicals? Primarily because they're not designed that way at the moment. It would just require further adjustments for it to work like that with every god in every, well, possible circumstance, especially because we have items that offer massive amounts of physical lifesteal relatively easily. Think, for example, a Devourer's Gauntlet. Furthermore, all magical AoE abilities get a lifesteal reduction to 33% because they're AoE, because they can hit more than one target. That is not the case for Soul Eater. Soul Eater will give you 100% off the 10% lifesteal, no matter what the circumstances. So you can hit as many targets as you want, as many times as you want, and there will be no reduction to that base percentage of the value that you're getting. This essentially means that there may be some sleeper gods for this item that can just benefit more from hitting multiple targets. If that ends up being true for anyone is another question. Well, let's not get ahead of ourselves here. Let's first talk about how the item exactly functions. When it comes to stacking, the description is to be taken quite literally. Everything that dies will stack Soul Eater. And everything does not only include your minions, the enemy's minions, any jungle creep, any god. It even includes yourself at the moment. Even when you die, you will get a stack. It will also include SWK Decoy, giving you 5 stacks. It will include Loki Decoy, giving you a stack. And even a tower getting destroyed will give you 1 stack. So it's not that hard to stack, considering there are frequently some things dying across the map at least. The circumstances where this is really abusable are probably very limited. I could imagine some interaction with Noir Clay Soldiers, possibly being that you could build it against her if you're in lane against her as a hunter, for example. But really, it's kind of more of a niche scenario, and usually we get the stacks from the minion waves, but it's still relatively fast. You kind of have to think of it more as 50 stacks than 100, because half of it is usually going to come from your own minion waves, unless you're jungling, but then you still get 7 stacks per jungle camp, so that's pretty decent too. Soul Eater will not have overkill damage, meaning that if a target dies, you will not lifesteal the full amount of damage that you dealt, but only as much damage as you dealt until you killed the target. So if you dealt 200 damage to someone, he had only 100 health left, you're only gonna lifesteal for 10% of the 100 damage, so 10 instead of 20 that you would get otherwise. When it comes to items, the effect itself is activated by any sort of physical damage. When it comes to gods, there are some exceptions. We'll talk about them towards the end. Stay tuned for that. But there are quite a few items we can include here. The first one is one that you get quite early in the game, and that's Bluestone. The Bluestone ticks will actually trigger Soul Eater. It's an incredibly minor amount, but it exists. Likewise, the proc from Heartseeker, which is extra physical damage, will proc an instance of Soul Eater as well. This can actually be utilized as those items kinda have at least a bit of a synergy compared to many others. They're both geared to at least somewhat hybrid guards that use basic attacks as well as abilities, and one gives you the penetration and the movement speed, the other one gives you a little more power and cooldown reduction, so they kind of work together in that regard. The next one that works is the Dot from Malice. This apparently counts as an ability here and will proc the lifesteal as such. Not too bad, so one way to make Malice a little bit more viable through that. Then we also have Height of the Enemy in Line. This actually works, but the question is, will you ever find any actual benefit in it? The reflected damage is already lower, and then the percentage of that is usually, well, a heal of 1. Not really doing much for you, as you can see here. The last item is one that is more interesting, and that is Kin Size. The damage effect from Kin Size, not the basic attack itself, actually works with Soul Eater. So this is especially beneficial for those hunters who may be able to make work with Soul Eater somehow, because they could then also build into a pen CDR build and finish up with Kins to get at least some basic attack damage and get the lifesteal back from that. Now that we've covered items that have interactions with Soul Eater, let's look at those items that are similar in their effect in general and could be used in its place. And there are two that stand out. The first one is Devourer's Gauntlet. This is specifically for hunters, or especially for hunters. Devourer's Gauntlet is a fair bit cheaper than Soul Eater. It's 2000 gold instead of 2400. Additionally, a fully stacked Devourer's Gauntlet will have 65 physical power while having the same starting power of 30. Also, they both start with 10% physical lifesteal. Devourer's Gauntlet, however, goes up to 24% while not getting the ability lifesteal. In total, you lose out on 10% cooldown reduction and on 10% ability lifesteal, but you get an extra 15 physical power and you get up to 14% extra lifesteal while also paying 400 less. That overall makes for better stats for most guards in my opinion. It's just more damage through the power and it is more lifesteal in most situations unless you're very ability focused, the only downside being that you don't get the cooldown reduction, which for most characters is not that crucial. 10% is nice, but it's not over the top great, and for many characters it won't warrant the extra price on top of that. The other downside with Devils is that Devils takes a little bit longer to stack, but depending on where you're playing, it's not that significant of a difference. In lane, the stacking difference should only be approximately 3 waves, but you also get extra power earlier and you get extra lifesteal earlier as you stack over time, different from Soul Eater, which just transforms at the end. So only for junglers really, Soul Eater is the more beneficial option because you're not going to stack Devils in the jungle. If you stack, you're usually building towards late game, and especially for late game, you usually get more damage out of basic attacks than out of abilities, especially as a hunter, and that makes a 24% lifesteal from Devils higher than 10% each from Soul Eater in most situations. The other item is Gladiator's Shield. This one is more geared towards the assassin side and takes a chunk of the other stats that Soul Eater has. Gladiator's Shield comes in at 1700 gold, being the cheapest of the three. It has 15 physical power, so significantly less, but it has 35 physical protection, making it a bit of a better trade in a direct 1v1 fight against another physical. It also has the 10% cooldown reduction that Soul Eater has, and it has a different form of heal. The form being 2.5% of your maximum health being returned upon hitting an enemy with an ability. To put this in perspective, with Gladiator's Shield, you will heal for 50 when you have 2000 health and you hit an enemy with an ability, whereas you would have to deal 500 damage with Soul Eater to get the same effect. Usually you will deal 500 damage if you hit at least 2 targets with something, or you have relatively high power, depending on the situation, but most of the time the heal on a single target from a single ability should be higher from Gladiator's Shield. Obviously exceptions exist here. Also, it's important that Gladiator's Shield is a lot less dependent on your item build, on the power that you're building, because you're always going to have that decent amount of base health, and how much health you build on top of that does factor in, but not as much. Overall, you save 700 gold, you will get 35 physical power less, you get 35 physical protection in return, which is, in my opinion, a pretty solid trade-off. You will not have to stack, but what you lose is the lifesteal from basic attacks. So if your character is purely ability focused and doesn't have big AoE, then in most situations Gladiator's shield should be the better choice even for sustain, or obviously you could combine the both. With this in mind, I don't really see too much value in Soul Eater just yet. I think that most hunters are better with Devos and most other characters are better off with Gladiator's shield. There are niche characters that can make use of it, but I feel like the price at the moment doesn't really justify picking it up when the effects overall are very similar to Devourer's Gauntlet, which is significantly cheaper. Give this item a price drop of approximately 200, 300 to 400 gold, and I think it would be in a much better spot, and I would think it would be more reasonable to pick it up than it is at the moment. But let's not get ahead of ourselves here. We still have to talk about the gods and their interactions with this item. And there are some interesting ones here, so we go through them one by one. So I spent approximately half an hour doing this over and over in order to get the results. And the results are, first of all, looking at the bees AMC. They work. I didn't record them myself because Ox has already tested it, but they do work. The next one is CAMAZOTZ and his heal. That actually does work, and the bonus heal that he gets, the up to 15%, are also factored in. If you look at the damage values here, it's more than 10%. So if you have 3 stacks on his passive on CAMAZOTZ, then the lifesteal from Soul Eater will also be increased. Daji's bleed, as well as her other dots through the burn or the ultimate, all work as well. They will heal you, even though not for much. Fenrir is interesting here because he has AoE splash damage with multiple hits on his 3. And it actually works just as intended. It will heal you for every single target that you hit with the ability for every single instance of the hit, so every one of the 4 hits for the full amount, so 100% of the 10%. That is kind of nice in itself, it's a nice effect, but I don't see too much application for it. There might be a benefit here in using this in lane if you get the item relatively early and you play him in solo, for example, to sustain that way. But then again, it's not really what you want to build in solo, so I'm really not sure where this would find application. Because in the end, in a team fight, you're not going to hit as many people with it and you're not going to look for the lifesteal that much. Though it does synergize to a fair bit with his 2, giving him even more lifesteal on top of that on a basic attack. Naja is probably one of the most interesting characters when it comes to this item. Not only will his ring toss heal you for every single bounce, it will also proc off bluestone once again. It also will heal from the crits on both his 3 and his ultimate. So if you happen to crit, then you will also get double the heal. Because even though it's an ability that crits, the ability damage is factored like a normal damage value for the lifesteal. So the more damage you deal, the more lifesteal you get, and the crit is calculated in. But even here we do have to say that 10% lifesteal on a single target isn't all that crazy. You see some healing here, but it's not like it's ridiculous, it's insane, it's uncountable or anything, and compared to his 2 it probably always falls short anyways. I do believe that Naja is one of the better choices for this item though. Nemesis Reflect is very confusing. I do think it heals because there were some health values popping up that shouldn't be from the Reflect itself, but rather from Soul Eater. But it's a very low value, obviously, because you're only gonna get the heal off the damage that you reflect back, which is already significantly lower. And next to the heal you get from the Reflect itself, it's pretty much nothing. Circuit's 1, when it crits, will also heal for the crit value similar to Naja. However, something else on Circuit does not work, which we'll get to in a bit. Thanatos, not very surprisingly, heals off his abilities as well. An interesting thing here is that on his scythe, his 1, you will actually see 4 different instances of healing when you hit an enemy. Why is that? Because you get the normal base damage value and the percentage value, and both get factored in individually for lifesteal. So suddenly you have 4 different sources of healing popping up. If you add in a Gladiator shield, you can make that 5. On top of that, he also has a relatively easy time hitting a full wave with his 3, and he has AoE damage through his ultimate, so there are a few more means for him to apply multiple hits on multiple targets. So I would say he's probably actually among the better choices if you want to just get the maximum of lifesteal potential out of him. Tyr does work in combination with his 2, this cleave with the self heal. You can double heal, but the value will obviously be super low if you build into a normal tank build, as this scales off power, so not really any benefit in that. Ullr works in every regard, and I point out Ullr here because I think he is one of the few gods that could really make use of this item. replacing Devos with this if you're looking for a lifesteal build on him, and you still have decent amount of lifesteal on your basics, at least in melee range through his passive. So there are some options here, and he has a decent way of hitting multiple enemies with both his 1 and his 3. So not a terrible choice for this item, and he benefits from the CDR. So maybe one of the few hunters where I would say you could consider this more than on others that just don't really benefit much from CDR. And now we have some guards where things don't work out like we would hope them to be. The first one being ARACHNE. ARACHNE does get the effect on most of her abilities, but not on her spiders, because her spiders count as pets here, and they apparently don't work for this lifesteal effect. Even though it's technically ability damage, they are their own characters and they don't heal you. Likewise, BASTET's cats will also not heal you. I thought that BASTET could be an interesting choice for this item. Without the cats, it really isn't that great in my opinion, so yeah, nope. Another one that doesn't work. True damage also does not work. This goes for Saket, Bakasura, and anything else that you could find. Likewise, magical damage doesn't work. This is actually an item section part here, but mystical mail doesn't function either. Last but not least, there's Mercury. I haven't shown this here, but he does not get the proc on his 1 because his 1 counts as a basic attack and gets the 33% reduction because it's an AoE basic attack. So not the effect of Soul Eater here, but rather the normal lifesteal effect. Overall, I think the idea of Soul Eater is really nice, but it needs some more refinement, and I think it's not that good yet. But it may very well be, especially if it gets some adjustments regarding the price in comparison to the stats. And with that, I thank you guys for watching. If you're not subscribed yet, feel free to click the sub button and maybe the bell. It really helps me out. Also, there will be a new benefit in clicking the bell. I will be dropping codes in the comment section or the description from time to time now. And if you're early in the video, the first one to see it, you can get the code. You can claim the code for a SMITE skin. So that's a little bonus on top of seeing my videos early. And I will see you for the next one tomorrow. DukeSloth out.